Hey everyone, how you doing? All right, got a new book. I was reading through. I just barely broke into it, so I'm not gonna, do a book review or anything like that. But it's definitely an interesting book because it kind of goes back, to the basics, right? Just back to sin. You can see that. So fallen. That's the title of it, and it's essentially a theology of sin. So it's just getting back, to the basics on what actually causes all the problems in this world, which is, you know, fallen. If you hadn't noticed, so it's horrible the shape that this place is in. Um, and as I'm reading back to the Bible and going through it, it's going through the Old Testament, so that's it's rough. If you wanted to see like everything horrible humans are capable of, you can either watch the news or go read the Old Testament, and you'll get a feel for it. But I figured I would talk about it's like the first chapter, so it's odd that they chose the first chapter to kind of go into sin's contemporary significance. So you can go read the Bible, the Old Testament, the newer New Testament. But even then, right, the New Testament, you're talking like 2,000 years ago, right? Depending on the time frames. But, like 3,500 to 2,000 years. So it's a long time, right? It's tough to put that in like today's society. Like, how is this relevant to me today, right? How is this relevant? The stories that they had back then, how's that relevant today? So it's nice that they chose to do the very first chapter to be like sin's contemporary significance. Like, why is it, why does it matter today? So I'll just do, just to give you an idea of why, I'll quote him here. So, we live in a time of extraordinary violence and wickedness. There was not just one Holocaust. Add to the Nazi slaughter of Jews, the Stalinist starvation of 20 million Ukrainians, the Maoist slaughter of perhaps 50 million Chinese, the massacre of between a quarter and a third of the population of Cambodia, tribal slaughter of Tutsis and Houthis, and various ethnic cleansings, various ethnic cleansings. How shall we calculate the damage, material and psychological, of terrorism in all of its forms? Unrestrained consumerism, which that's a nasty one, and all of the damage done by drug abuse of many kinds, including alcoholism. The digital revolution that ushers in spectacular improvements in research, data handling, and communication also brings us access to instant porn, one of the worst things we have, with untold damage done to man-woman relationships in general and to marriages in particular. Shall we add the cruelty of racism, the exploitation of the weak, and greed and laziness in all of their forms? And what of those massive and ubiquitous sins that are primarily the absence of particular virtues? Unholiness, impiety, prayerlessness, unloving hearts, and ingratitude. Ooh, wow. That's a lot. And this, I think, was back from like 2013, right? So they didn't even know about COVID yet and all the other, wars and everything we have going on. But it all goes back to the same thing, really. It's just sin. It's missing the mark. It's operating in ways that we're not supposed to, because God, in God's wisdom, has told us, like, hey, don't do these things because they're bad for you. Because guess what? God created this place. If you look around wherever you happen to be and you're watching this video, look around, right? God created the world that allowed this environment to be created, including the universe and everything in it. It's all created. It's not an accident. It didn't just happen like poof. Oh, we're here. No, it didn't just happen. It's not an accident. So we're created. So obviously, the person, entity, hey, stop. The entity, God, that created this place might know the best way to operate inside of it, right? It would make sense, right? If you want to know like how something works, you might want to ask the person that built it, right? The ultimate engineer, however you want to look at it. So God tells us, like, hey, don't do these things, because if you do, really bad things are going to happen, and I know that because I built this place. So I might understand, like, what you should and shouldn't do. So I thought it was very interesting, that they opened up the book like that, right? Because, they go into it, and they're going to go into, like, the individual sins based on the Bible. And the Bible in its current form, right? There's a lot of things in there that I don't agree with, or things that I do and things that I don't. So as I'm reading through, I'm basically got two colored highlighted pins, and one of them, is like, yeah, I agree with this. This is good. I don't agree. No, that doesn't make sense. So I'm going through that. It's going to take me a while. It's a large book. It's one of the big problems too, because for people to get into it, it's such a large book. Like, who's got the time to read through all that? All right. You need to give them kind of like cheat sheets, things that make it easy, right? Just at least to get the bare concepts. But they go through the contemporary significance first, which I thought was an awesome way to do it, right? Tell them like why it matters today, and then you can get into like the background story and all that. And then they're going to go into like sin and the law and the former and later prophets and all that. So they go through all that too. So it's cool. It's going to be nice because the Old Testament really beats me down mentally. Like, it's just horrific seeing what people are capable of, what we're capable of. So it's nice to be able to have like another book you can just jump over to that gets down to like just the brass tacks, right? Just sin, right? Which causes all the problems that are in the Bible. Just the basic sins, which everybody, unfortunately falls into those traps. And then basically how it unfolds, the problems that it creates, and then those are the narratives there that you're going to read about. So I just thought it was interesting to talk about it. Let's see. Just absolutely horrible. Let's see, we got Holocaust, right? Slaughter of Jews, starvation of 20 million Ukrainians, Maoist killing of 50 million Chinese, massacre of a quarter and a third of the Cambodians, tribal slaughters, ethnic cleansings, terrorism in all its forms, unrestrained consumerism, drug abuse, alcoholism, instant pornography, porn in general. Oh my gosh. Cruelty of racism, exploitation of the weak, greed, laziness, unholiness, impiety, prayerlessness, unloving hearts, and ingratitude. Wow. It's interesting, like when you see it all, like just in one little paragraph, you just throw in, like, maybe that's not everything, but it's a pretty good list of just all the horrific things that sin creates. And they all start from that first sin, right? You have that first sin that happens, and then you can just see everything that unfolds after it. All the negative effects after it. So you have the initial sin, that's where you screwed up, you missed the mark. And then because of that, you have all these choices and branches that happen because of that one sin. So you do the one sin, you think, oh, it's just one little sin, it's no big deal. Well, that branches off your choices, and it's like the largest role-playing game you've ever seen. And your choices branch it off, and you make other sins, and they branch off. So it's kind of like that. But it all starts from the sins, right? The individual sins that you're creating. But it's interesting just to see it like in one paragraph, all the horrific things that are going on. And then they even talk about, because of like moral blindness. Yeah, I mean, basically we've lived in here in this fallen world for so long, we don't even see it because it's normal. Right? You don't even notice it anymore because that's just the way people are. It's just the way people are. It even says here, like, the founding fathers of the United States constructed a constitution with division of powers and system checks. No, division of power and system checks and balances, so that they believe that they had been taken to curtail pervasive sin, especially the lust for power. Well, it did not work. If you look at American politics today, this checks and balances, it may be one of the best systems in the world, but it's also a system absolutely controlled by greed. So if you thought that was going to somehow prevent a lust for power and greed, you failed. So maybe it's one of the best out there, but it's not good enough. Just look around. There's nothing but greed. That's what controls it, right? That's why if you want to be elected president and you don't have any money, it's never going to happen. Never. Right? The way this system is designed, it's based on money. What was the term? You need a war chest, right? To be president, you have to have a war chest of money. You have to be filthy rich and know a bunch of filthy rich people to get elected. That's how it works in the United States. It's a money system. If you don't have any money, well, no one's ever going to know about you and you're never going to get elected. It's not going to happen. But, if you want to do some reading, definitely go check it out. I'm looking forward to it. It'd be a nice way to break up, the Old Testament, which is crushing me. Thankfully, I'm in Esther now, and I remember reading that one. So Esther, Mordecai. So I like that one. That should end well. But there's a lot wrong with the book too. So I'm marking those, and I'll speak to that as I go through it. But yeah, sin just absolutely destroyed this place and us, which is why this world is in shambles. And until we figure out the sin and get the sin out of our lives as a collective, as a whole, like in society, it won't get any better. Because sin is the issue. That's the ultimate issue, right? You can see it, right? Pride, greed, lust, envy, indulgence, wrath, sloth. Those are just the deadly sins, right? And you have the virtues next to it. But I'll jot them all down as I'm going through, because I have to go back to the New Testament. Thankfully, I can't wait to get there. So we'll write down, I'll get a little hot sheet on the sins. Obviously, animal slaughter, they missed the mark on that one entirely. As I mentioned before, right? We should be God's hands and feet here while we're here, right? We should be God's hands and feet and do God's will. If we want to live in accordance with God and be in, good graces with God. So that would involve taking care of all the beings and also all of God's creations, right? The planet, us, the animals, our souls, everything. All of it. So, but you can't do that while you're living in a fallen way, right? If you're living in sin, it's going to be very difficult to do God's work because you're going to consistently get tripped up. You're going to get snared up and harmed and things like that. So the only way to make it through on your eternal journey, not just the one that you happen to be in currently, is to live without sin. That's the only way to ensure that you have an amazing eternity. Regardless of your circumstances here, currently, some people are doing really well, some people are doing okay, some people are not doing well. But the way the system is built is that sin has consequences. If it didn't, the system wouldn't be fair, right? If there were no consequences, the system wouldn't be fair, right? Can you imagine this world if there were no laws at all? And I know that varies depending on which region you're in, the country, things like that. But just imagine living in a world with no laws, right? You can drive as fast as you want with a bottle of Jack Daniels in your hand, just guzzling it, just driving all over the road, doing whatever you want. Got your gun out the window, you're just popping shots off. You can do whatever you want, right? That would be like hell, because you wouldn't be able to own anything because people would just take it, right? That would be absolute chaos. That would be do whatever feels good to you. Whatever feels good, do it. You would not want to live in a place like that. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of people operate here, which is the problem. All right? So you've essentially got people, just driving down the road, going like 120 miles an hour, a bottle of Jack Daniels. They got a hooker in that seat. They got a pound of blow in the back seat, right? They got the gun out the window. They're shooting in the air. They're doing whatever they want on their way to rob a bank. That's how people, hey, that's kind of how people live today. I know it's an extreme example, but we live as if there are no laws that govern this place that we happen to be in, right? This is not an accident. Look around. Do you you think there's just poof, one day just happened? No. There is a creator, and there are created beings and environments and things like that. So the person who created it, if that entity is telling you, hey, this is what you should do to prosper in this environment, then we should probably listen. Because the person who built the car probably understands how the car runs and operates and maintenance schedules and things like that, right? That would make sense. So, like I said, there's some serious issues there that will have to get corrected. Between all my videos, I'm sure you figured that out, right? It even talks about in here how... sorry. It even talks about in here how... I don't know which page it's on. But basically, God came down as an incarnation and was the Son of God. I understand why you would call it the Son of God. I get that. Because the incarnation in human form, something that you'd be able to relate to, is not the same as the all-knowing, all-powerful God. So I understand why it's said like that. You got the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. I get that. But God isn't really a sex, like male, female, things like that. God's not, you can't put God in a box like that. So, Father, I understand why you say that. And then Son, in a sense that it's much smaller than the Father, sure, right? You can call it the Son. But at the end of the day, it's basically God incarnate on earth in human form. Not nearly as capable, extremely limited. Hey, extremely limited, right? Human form, something relatable. So, and that's what I mean. Things like that just need to be corrected. But it's essentially an incarnation on earth, right? So Jesus came, right? And then God comes down and can incarnate again, right? Incarnated, and then can reincarnate. So, just food for thought. But that's about it. I just wanted to kind of speak on that. So far I like it. It's great. I think it'll be nice to break up the Old Testament reading, which is really dragging me down because it's horrific. It's almost like watching the news, to be honest. It's like watching the news and all you see are like the bad things, right? The news, all they what is it? If it bleeds, it leads, something like that. So they always put on the stories about horrific things that happen, like wars and famines and bombings and tornadoes and hurricanes and like anything bad that happens, it's going to be on the news. You don't see too many stories about, this guy just saved a puppy out of a lake, or, this guy just saved someone out of a car crash, thing like that. I mean, you see some stories like that, but a lot of the time it's horrific. It's like just horrible things that happen. And I guess that's, people like to watch train wrecks, right? So maybe that's why. And I'm sure they've done, studies, and they figure out, like, because they measure, like, how much screen time do you have, and sometimes they can figure out, like, which, where you're looking on the screen and which ads you're looking at. It's crazy, the amount of technology they have. So I guess they've done those studies, and they just figured out what people want to know. But it's sad, like I said, going back to the Old Testament, like, if you read it, all you're going to see is, like, the worst that humanity is capable of. The wars, because of all the greed, right? It goes back to, like, the basic sins. They were greedy. They were selfish. They didn't care about other people, which is why they didn't mind wiping them out to steal their land and their gold and their precious stones and their wives and their daughters. They saw no value in people. That's why they didn't mind. Hey! They didn't see value in people. Stop! Which is why they didn't mind killing each other. Because they didn't see value in them. They're like, they're less than human. They're not on the same level. Like, this is me and this is them, so it's okay if I wipe them out and take their stuff and rape people and set them on fire. But like, it's insanity. God's expectation for us is to be godly and holy, right? Think like Adam and Eve, that level of holiness. Everyone's walking around and you respect everyone. You don't lie to people. You treat people honestly. Like, it's utopia. It's like heaven. But instead, you've got this place, right? Because of free will. And we've chosen not to listen to God, not to take direction, and to sin. And then we fall into those snares and traps, and then we get hit, right? We get pinched, we get bitten. That happens. And then after a while, you just live in a place that's so screwed up that no one even sees it anymore because it's normal. So you turn on the news, you're like, oh yeah, they just killed, 20,000 people here in this war, because they don't agree with them for whatever reason, or, they just blew these people up, or, they just released this virus on people, or, whatever the case may be. Like, it's because they don't care. They don't value your life. We're all created. We're all people. We all have value. But when you sin and you're selfish and greedy and lustful and envious and you like to indulge and you're full of wrath, and you're full of pride, things like that, if you check those boxes, you won't care about wiping people out and taking all their stuff and stealing, right? Killing people, burning them, raping them, stabbing them, hanging them, whatever terms you want to use. You won't care because you're full of sin and you've lived in a sinful place so long you don't even see it anymore because it's normal, right? Imagine someone who's been in hell for thousands of years. We don't even need to talk about that, but I mean, just in a hellish environment. Let's put it that way, right? A hellish environment. So let's say you're in a hellish environment for a long time. After a while, it's normal. It's what you know. It's all you know. You can't even see it. You'd have to be, that's a good example. You ever been like in a room and like, I don't know, it's like some old food or something in the fridge. It's like this nasty smell. Nasty, right? You got something bad in the fridge. It stinks. And you smell it initially. But after a while, if you're in that room long enough, you get nose deaf to it, right? For whatever reason, glandular, whatever. After a while, you can't really smell it anymore because you've been sitting in it for so long, right? But then somebody comes in from outside who hasn't been sitting in that stank room for hours or days or however long it is, right? So they're not nose deaf, right? They can smell it. So they walk in, and as soon as they walk in, they smell that stank refrigerator you have. And they're like, wow, this place sucks. It really, really stinks in here. Really bad. But you don't realize it because you've been sitting in that gnarly, stinking room for so long that you don't smell it anymore. You're deaf to the smell, right? You can't smell it. Now, if you were to leave and go out into a nice, beautiful environment that doesn't smell like rotting death, and then come back in, you would smell it. And then you'd be like, wow, this place sucks. It smells horrible in here. How in the world can you live here with this smell, this stench? But you wouldn't realize that unless you had gone out to an environment that didn't smell like rotting death and then come back in. Because if you just live in it after a while, I don't know psychologically how that works or biologically, but if you're in a stinky environment long enough, eventually you just become like nose deaf to it. You can't really smell it. You just get used to it. I guess your brain tunes it out or something. But for someone who's walking in from a nicer environment, you realize it immediately. It like slaps you in the face. You're like, wow, this place reeks. It's horrible. So in that metaphor, I guess, like, we're in that room right now with that nasty, wretched, rotting whatever it is in the fridge, and it's sin. and it stinks. And this place is horrible because of sin. That's why. It's all because of sin. If we fix the sin problem, we can take that rotting, nasty, disgusting burger or steak or whatever that is in the fridge that's just awful, and we can get it out and we can beautify this place and make it a place worthy of God's attention. Because right now, it reeks. It stinks. It's awful. And it's because of sin. So once we get the sin out of this world, we'll fix it. But that's it. Just remember, God loves us and wants to provide guidance, right? Wants to help us so that we can fix this place. And then we can have a beautiful place to live, and our souls will be protected, and our eternal journey will be amazing. But we're not there just yet. But you can do your part and get sin out of your life today.